What's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we get to take a look at Ayaneo's brand new Pocket S. So if you're familiar with this device, you know that they launched their Indiegogo, and actually a few months ago I got my hands on one of these. It was a pre-production unit, early hardware, early software, but I spent a lot of time with it. I've actually had a lot of fun with the Pocket S, and recently Ayaneo was kind enough to send over a production unit so we could really take a look at how this thing performs. We can run some benchmarks on it, test out some emulators, some native Android games, and get a good feel of how this thing really performs. Now, straight off the bat, I do think this is one of the best looking handhelds on the market right now. This is the Ice Soul White version. They also offer an Obsidian Black version. Personally, I really like the Ice Soul White version, and the one we have here is actually their highest end model. We've got a 1440p IPS display, 1TB internal storage, and 16GB of RAM. Now keep in mind, you can actually get this with a 1080p display, which will bring that price down, but the 1440p display looks absolutely amazing, and I personally haven't tested the 1080p model, so I really can't compare the two. The main difference between the Pocket S and many of the other handhelds that Ayaneo has created is this is actually running Android. It's not running a Windows operating system. And since it's an Android device, we've actually got an ARM SoC instead of an x86 CPU. This is using the new Snapdragon G3X Gen 2, and on paper it's very similar to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, but we've got a much more powerful GPU here. It actually clocks up to 1000 MHz, and it's known as the Adreno A32. And this allows them to get that really sleek design. As you can see down here, we've got our USB Type-C, dual stereo speakers, and an intake vent for the active cooling they have here for that G3X Gen 2. Up top, we've got our linear triggers, shoulder buttons, a couple extras that we can actually program from software, our power/fingerprint sensor, volume rocker, LED indicator, and our exhaust vent for that built-in cooling system. Of course, there are some other handhelds on the market that the Pocket S is going to be going up against, and I wanted to give you kind of a size comparison here, more specifically between the ODIn 2, which just happens to be another Android handheld, and of course, the Steam Deck. This is the Steam Deck OLED. Obviously, Steam Deck will have a much larger screen, and it might look like the ODIn does have a bigger screen than the Pocket S, but in fact, these are around the same exact size. The Pocket S has a 6-inch IPS, the ODIn 2 has a 5.96-inch IPS display, but you can see that that Pocket S is coming in much slimmer than anything else here. When it comes to the overall specs of the Pocket S, Ayaneo will be offering a couple different RAM and storage variants, but all of them are going to be utilizing that Snapdragon G3X Gen 2 SoC, 8 cores up to 3.36 GHz, and we've got that Adreno A32 GPU up to 1000 MHz. This chip was specifically designed by Qualcomm for handheld gaming machines, and they've put it right in the Pocket S. You can get this with up to 16GB of RAM, and all of them use LPDDR5X. If you opt for the 1TB model, it will utilize UFS 4.0 storage, so we've got some really fast storage here, but the 128GB versions of the Pocket S will use UFS 3.1 storage. They're offering two different displays. You can get a 6-inch 1080, but the one we have here is a 6-inch 1440p borderless screen, 490 pixels per inch, 120% sRGB, and 85% DCI-P3. Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 5.3, a 6000 mAh battery, and we're running Android 13 on this device. First and foremost, the thing you really need to keep in mind is the Pocket S is an Android handheld. We're not running Windows, we're not running Linux, but we do have full access to Google Play, so all of your favorite games can be downloaded there. Tons of emulators are compatible with the Pocket S, and we've got a lot of power there with that Snapdragon G3X Gen 2. And with iSpace and iHome here, we've basically got a built-in launcher, so we can actually add all of our favorite apps up top here. Plus, when it comes to iSpace itself, it's basically a front end for all of our emulators and games. And you can basically just import the games from your Pegasus setup or even Emulation station. It'll scan those directories and get them imported for you. But personally, I've been using Launchbox on this device, mainly because I already had this set up on my Galaxy devices, and all I really had to do is transfer my folder over. It works great on the Pocket S, lots of great themes that we can download, it's fully customizable, and it'll automatically download all of our artwork. That's one of the main reasons I like to use this, plus it's really easy to set up. But keep in mind, with iHome and iSpace, you really don't even need to install a third-party front end or a third-party launcher. But if you're looking for a new one to mess around with, I can highly recommend Console Launcher. It's available on Google Play, and this is one that I've been installing on all of my Android phones. It's gotten a bunch of updates recently, but it's fully customizable. I personally love the way it looks, and we can use those live wallpapers with something like Wallpaper Engine in the background. Talking about performance here, Ayaneo has set up a couple different custom profiles, and if we press our Ayaneo button, it's going to bring up our side menu. From here, it's going to give us all the information we need to know: fan speed, RAM usage, CPU usage, temperature. We've got a few different performance modes that we can go into, and we've also got this side button over here, which is going to bring us into max performance. Now with max performance, it's going to bring up a little bit of a warning here. This is full out on that Snapdragon G3X Gen 2, up to 15 watts on an ARM SoC and a handheld. This thing performs absolutely amazingly. It's also going to bring that fan speed up. There's a lot more here to IA space and the IA settings. I actually want to plug this into my game capture so I can give you a better look at all of that. It does support video out of that USB Type-C port on the bottom, so we can actually connect this to a larger display quite easily. So again, from the very top, we've got our performance and our performance settings. Moving down to controller, we can set up the vibration, sensitivity on the triggers and the joysticks, custom buttons, gyro, so we do have a gyro built in here. Handheld, this is just going to give us basic Android settings: brightness, volume, airplane mode. We can also swap the RGB directly from here. We've got some widgets and our settings. Going up to our handheld settings, this is going to bring us right into our IA space settings. Account, we can log in with our IA account if we want to. Game library, data sync, system language, input method, lighting effect, fully controllable RGB around those analog sticks. Controller calibration, and I've had a few firmware updates where I had to go back and recalibrate the controller. Really easy process. Update, when we've got updates available, they'll be listed here. All settings, it's going to bring us right into our native Android settings and our About section. So yeah, having that video out over USB Type-C is really nice. I've got this connected to my game capture right now, but that's going to a 1440p monitor, and it does look really good here. And when it comes to ergonomics, it's actually pretty comfortable, even though it's a super thin handheld. Some of these do kind of dig into your hand, but the way they've got the sides shaped on this, it just kind of rests right in your palm. You can reach all of the buttons really nicely. Hall-based analog sticks, so you don't have to worry about drift or anything like that. And we've got a really nice D-pad. This reminds me of the Vita. It's not the Vita D-pad, it's just because the material it's made out of, and it's not using dome switches. We've actually got rubber conductive pads underneath all of these buttons here, and we will be testing this D-pad out by the end of the video. Couple extra buttons, our home and Ayaneo button. So it's really easy to navigate the Android operating system without using the touch screen. Moving around to the back here, we've got linear triggers, a little bit of throw. It's not a ton given the size of this unit, but they are fully linear, so for racing games, this really helps out for just gassing it a little bit, giving it a little bit of break if you want to do some drifting here and there. And overall, I'm really happy with what Ayaneo has done here. Now, the main thing somebody's going to want to do with this handheld is game. After all, it is a gaming handheld. So let's go ahead and test out some native Android games. And anything that natively supports a controller, it's going to work directly out of the box. We've also got a built-in mapper, like I showed you when we were taking a look at the Ayaneo software. So for games like Genshin Impact, you can map the controller if you need to. But we've got a ton of Android games, and especially emulators, that are automatically going to be set up, ready to go with the built-in controls on the Pocket S. And one of my favorite things about the extra software we have here is the performance monitor, or the performance overlay. This is going to give us a real-time FPS counter, also going to give us our CPU, GPU usage, temperature, battery percentage, and things like that. Comes in really handy for monitoring how well a game runs on this device. And for something like Minecraft, I mean, it's not a super hard game to run. I think the view distance is set at about 30 chunks. I didn't have to go in and change anything. It just ran right there at 60. And even though I've got this in performance mode right now, even in balanced mode, you're going to be able to run this game no problem at all. And there's no controller setup for a game like this. Minecraft on Android just works with all kinds of controllers. You could even plug in a keyboard here and play Minecraft on this device. Next up, we've got Diablo Immortal. We're at ultra settings, but unfortunately, I can't go up to 60 FPS. It's grayed out from the settings. So we are at 30, but there's no doubt that this would run at ultra 60 FPS on this device. Hopefully, that's fixed down the road by the developer, but right now we are at 30. So far, with all of the native Android games I've thrown at the Pocket S, I haven't run into any performance issues. That Snapdragon G3X Gen 2 does have more than enough power for basically all of the Android games on the market right now. And before we move over to test some higher-end Android games and emulation, I wanted to give you a look at some benchmarks here. So the first one we have is Geekbench 6, single-core 2049, multi 5314. One of the biggest questions I've had about the Pocket S from viewers is how does it stack up against the ODIn 2's performance? Right here you can see that the ODIn 2 did beat this out in Geekbench 6 multi-core, but lost against it in single, which is a bit odd because the Pocket S does have a higher clock on that CPU, at least on that big X core. And yeah, I definitely thought the Pocket S was going to come ahead in this area, but I mean, with this G3X Gen 2, the real upgrade is actually in the GPU. So the next one we have here is 3D Mark. This is Wildlife Extreme. On the Pocket S, we scored a 4,742. On the ODIn 2, we got a 3,739. And keep in mind, both of these are in extreme performance mode with the fans set to max while running both of these tests here. So it looks like the A32 GPU in the Pocket S is beating out the ODIn 2. And the final one we have here is Antutu. On the ODIn 2, it looks like we're getting around 1,558,000. And on the Pocket S, 1,725,000. So it is beating out the ODIn in Antutu. But if you take a look down the list, the ODIn 2 CPU score is still a bit higher than the Pocket S. But that GPU score really does kind of trump it, given that we have that newer GPU with a much higher clock. This is just going to make it easier on me. Got a stationary setup using an Xbox controller connected over Bluetooth. Here's the Android version of Devil May Cry Peak of Combat. From the settings, we're at UHD 60 FPS, and this G3X Gen 2 is handling it just fine. This game does work natively with the built-in controls, or if you want to connect an external controller like we have here, not a problem. But we still haven't got native Android controller support for Genshin Impact, and that's where the built-in controller mapping comes in. I've mapped my Xbox controller using the built-in Ayaneo software. And if you've ever tried to run the Android version of Genshin Impact on a lower-end device, you know, sometimes we got to take it down to low, go to 30 FPS. But with the Pocket S in performance mode, we're at very high settings. I didn't have to turn off bloom or anything like that. 60 FPS. So no matter what Android game you throw at this device, it's going to run it just fine. And now it's time to move over to some emulation. Now, unfortunately, with everything going on right now, there are some emulators that I personally just don't want to show off. So unfortunately, we can't really take a look at, how those run. But the first thing we have here is some PSP using PPSSPP. Sega Rally Revo natively ran at 30 FPS. I still love playing this game. And right now, we're actually at 8x resolution. Even with the harder to run games, we can run them at 8x. I'm sure we could probably go up to 10x with this, but it's kind of pointless. 8x is 4K for PSP, and we've got a 1440p display. But heading right into one of the harder ones to run, Ghost of Sparta, still at 8x resolution, and it doesn't slow down at all. Of course, taking the resolution down will save us a little bit of battery, and we can get some really awesome battery life out of this thing. But I kind of wanted to max this out, show you how far it can go with PSP, and it really does an amazing job. Anything under PSP is going to run great. I've got some Dreamcast using the Redream emulator just for a little bit of D-pad testing, and so far I've been able to pull off these moves pretty easily. Missed a couple here and there, it's something I need to get used to, but it doesn't have a lot of throw to it, as you can see. It's kind of stiff, and it's not stiff because of the pad they use, it just really doesn't have a lot of roll, but it is accurate. Moving over to some Gamecube using the Dolphin emulator. We're at 1080p right now, and this is one of those games I usually play on Dreamcast. Actually, I've never tested it on Gamecube, but the draw distances here are so much longer than the Dreamcast game, I might start playing it over here. But either way, upscaled to 1080 with the Dolphin emulator on this device is a treat, and there are some easier to run games that can go even higher, but 1080 still looks great, even with a harder one to emulate like Automodalista. Using the OpenGL backend because we've got a Snapdragon chip, and this kind of powers right through GameCube and Wii. Even with the harder to emulate games like F-Zero GX with that Fire Field track, trying that on a lower end chip really does kind of bring it to its knees. But the Snapdragon G3X Gen 2 in the Pocket S runs it at 1080 60 FPS. And finally, we've got some PS2 using Nether SX2, Gran Turismo 3 at 4x resolution, so we're over 1080p right now, and I gotta say, it really doesn't do it justice filming this screen here. We're not quite at 1440p with this game, kind of matching the screen's resolution, but it looks really good on this IPS. With this one, I was able to go up to 4x, but with the next one, I had to take it down to 3x. Still not bad at all. We've got Ratchet and Clank, up your arsenal. Got a couple fluctuations here and there, but this game is kind of notorious for that, even using something like PCSX2 on a Windows machine. So given that we're upscaled to 3x here on the Pocket S, I really think it's holding its own with PS2 emulation. So in the time I've spent with the pre-production unit and the new production unit, I've had a great time with the Pocket S. Battery life is also really good. It kind of ranges across the board depending on your performance profile, if you've got RGB, how bright the screen is, but you can expect anywhere from 4 hours to 11 hours of gameplay out of this unit, depending on what you're doing. It's a 6,000 milliamp hour battery coming in at 23.1 watts for this smaller device, and we don't pull that much while we're playing lower end emulators or something like Minecraft, but when we move on up in performance mode with the fan all the way up, this CPU can pull up to 15 watts, so definitely keep that in mind. Super thin design. I think the ergonomics here are decent given that they went with kind of a flat device here. No humps on the rear to kind of hug your palm around, so if you know you're not into these flat devices, then you might not like the way this thing is set up. This is Ayaneo's second Android device, and yeah, it's definitely their most powerful Android device to date, but you know, Ayaneo might release something even more powerful next month, you never know. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you're interested in learning a little more about the Pocket S or maybe even picking one up, I'll leave some links down below. Their Indiegogo is live. And keep in mind, they are offering different storage, RAM, and screen variants. So definitely pick and choose what you think you want. 1080p up to 1440 and 12 gigs of RAM up to 16. If you've got any questions or you want to see anything else running on the Pocket S, let me know in the comments below. Like always, thanks for watching.